Then go to the other one.
Just 1 sec here.
You have to scroll up, Ashok, back to 7 realities.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect.
Avatar Meher Baba ki jai. Mama ji,
Meher Baba ki jai.
would you like to read the
Avatar Meher Baba ki jai. The 7 realities: existence, love, sacrifice, renunciation, knowledge, control, and surrender. I give no importance to creed, dogma, caste, or the performance of religious ceremonies and rites, but to the understanding of the following 7 realities. Number 1, the only real existence is that of one and only God, who is the self in every finite self. The only real love is the love for this infinity God, which arouses an intense longing to see, know, and become one with its truth, God. The only real sacrifice is that in which, in pursuance of this love, all things, body, mind, position, welfare, and even life itself are sacrificed. The only real renunciation is that which abandons, even in the midst of worldly duties, all selfish thoughts and desires. The only real knowledge is the knowledge that God is the inner dweller in good people and in so-called bad, in saint and in so-called sinner. This knowledge requires you to help all equally as circumstances demand without expectation of reward. When compelled to take part in a dispute, to act without the slightest trace of enmity or hatred, to try to make others happy with brotherly or sisterly feeling for each one, and to harm no one in thought, word, or deed, not even those who harm you. The only real control is the discipline of the senses to abstain from indulgence in low desires, which alone ensures absolute purity of character. The only real surrender is that in which poise is undisturbed by any adverse circumstance, and the individual, amidst every kind of hardship, is resigned with perfect calm to the will of God. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai.
Avatar Meher Baba ki jai. Thank you, Mama ji. And now we will start with the part 2 of chapter 6 of Listen Humanity. But before that, if there are any questions or if any discussion points on what we had done the earlier chapters, and then we can start with the reading of Listen Humanity. Can you see my screen, please? Mamaji, chapter 6.
We are saying only the 7 realities.
So you'll have to close.
Oh, I'll have to close. 1 second. Can you see Mamaji now? Chapter 6?
No, we are saying your.
No, I think you shared a window, so you'll have to share it again.
Okay, 1 second, 1 second. I'm having it on my screen. Sorry. Any questions from the past?
I was not there, so I don't have any questions.
You got any questions from the past?
Can I ask questions about my past, or it's only about Listen Humanity past?
No, Listen Humanity. About Listen Humanity.
I'm just pulling your leg. Okay, share the screen.
1 second. It says open share tray. 1 second.
Yeah, that's at the bottom.
Desktop. 1 second. I'll just get it. 1 second. Desktop. Now is it there?
Yes.
Yeah, there.
Baba. Can you see chapter 6, Ways to the Path, and its stages and states and stages?
Yes.
So
Clear.
if
You
there are
can
no
zoom it up a
questions,
little bit.
sorry, if there are some questions, fine. Otherwise, we can start with this reading. Jai Baba. So we begin with part 2, chapter 6, the ways to the path and its states and stages. Truly happy people are rare in spite of the smiles, which are usually the brave front for varying degrees of internal misery. Yet, everywhere and every walk of life, man is longing for happiness and searching desperately for some means of breaking out of the trap which his life has become. It is not his fault if he assumes that the solution to his deep dissatisfaction lies in a sensual life or in achievement in business or the social world or in a life of exciting experiences. Neither is it his fault if life is not really long enough to teach him factually that he would find even more profound disillusionment if these goals were to be fulfilled to the hilt. If he would suspect that his ideas of achieving a successful and happy life were wrong and that he must try some new way of living, then the stalemate might be broken. A new line in the divine picture is sketched only when some individual takes life forcefully in his hands, breaks up the old patterns, and insists on creating something new by his own inner vision. Progress in the inner life of the individual is accomplished by such a breaking with the old and venturing forth into new ways. True happiness can come only to one who will find the courage to strike free of the attachments which he has formed through a sterile lifetime. If he will not do this, he is shackled endlessly to the treadmill of oppressive action in which happiness is so transient that it has almost disappeared the moment it is experienced. After it has disappeared, there is only the persistent, bottomless vacuity of mind which strangles life, regardless of repeated efforts to fill it with endless experiences. Such suffering comes from blunt ignorance or persistent attachment to illusion. The average person plays with illusion as children play with toys. It is not easy for little children to give up their toys, and it is equally difficult for adults to relinquish the mental and emotional toys to which they have become habituated. The mind of the individual is very old, and through the ages, it has become deeply engrossed in playing with illusion. It has become addicted to this self-created spectacle, and it has no thought other than to go on watching with fascination through cycles and cycles of creation. So I pause here and say that there is a reference to the cycles and cycles of many ages, and one lifetime is a small period. If there are any questions, if there are any comments, please button and let me know. And I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Yes, great. Please continue unless people have any questions.
Perfect. During this, yeah, 1 second, yeah, please.
You're crystal clear.
Oh, thank you, Amitaji.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. During this period of rebirth in cosmic illusion, the individualized soul becomes identified with the physical body due to the limitations imposed upon consciousness by impressions, sanskaras. Its knowledge of reality is therefore necessarily restricted to the products and inferences of sense perception. Information so obtained is completely inadequate and even misleading insofar as the true nature of reality is concerned. The quest for happiness is irretrievably enmeshed in the problem of the illusion of the world of form with which the individual self has become identified through the body. If this illusion can be shattered, the shackles which bind happiness are automatically shattered as well. But how to shatter illusion? An individual who mistakenly believes he is a coward may live a lifetime of misery during which all his actions are shaped by this incorrect belief. If with some event in his life, but if some event in his life challenges him so deeply that he unthinkingly strides forth with great courage, then the illusion will suddenly vanish and he will see himself as a different being. Often it takes a real crisis to bring out a sure knowledge of the real inner self, and it is always a creative knowledge. Even as the individual can be wrong in his convictions regarding his own nature, so he is often wrong about the nature of the world around him. In reality, it is a world of illusion that separates him from his true birthright of freedom and happiness in oneness with the One. Actually, no individual is entirely devoid of some real happiness in some form, for God, as an endless and fathomless ocean of bliss, is also within every person, and no one is entirely cut off from Him. Pleasure sought in illusion inevitably results in endless perpetuation of that very same false life of the ego, which leaves the individual exposed to intense suffering. I take a pause here. I think Baba is referring to the illusion within illusion where we don't see our true selves. Continuing, the whole play of illusion and suffering it engenders functions by the divinely established law of karma, cause and effect. Therefore, suffering must be accepted with grace and fortitude. It must be remembered that one's own actions are the cause of much of one's suffering, and therefore wise action can minimize it. But real alleviation of suffering requires spiritual enlightenment, and for that, man must turn to the perfect masters and the God man avatar. If the world of form is only an illusion in reality, and if its harvest is such a rich one of misery, then why should its experience be required of the soul? Life in the world of matter is an unavoidable phase in the progress of the individual, inasmuch as it provides the field for action. Action is the expression and therefore the focusing of the mental and emotional impressions, sanskaras, which impel the individual. As the individual acts, other motivating forces incompatible with that momentary effort are withheld. Pretty profound, huh? This paragraph. I'll just repeat the last line. As the individual acts, other motivating forces incompatible with the momentary effort are withheld. Continuing, action is the paramount means through which the individual exercises discrimination in choice and adjustment between the many claims exerted upon his consciousness. Action also links a large number of individuals together through the innumerable karmic ties which have arisen out of past service and bondage. The material world offers the necessary environment for this interchange and interdependence. On one hand, these karmic ties trap the mind in a complex web. On the other hand, they facilitate collective life with all its opportunities for exercise of love, sacrifice, service, and mutual help. Through the negative lessons of hate and malice, as well as the positive lessons of love and service, the individual finds himself compelled to participate in collective effort. The mind's seeming isolation is continually invaded by the live streams of other minds, ultimately enabling the individual to abandon entirely the illusion he had entertained of being separate. Thus, he gradually comes to realize the unity of all life. In spite of the suffering entailed, experience in the material world of action is thus not without compensating value. It constitutes a necessary phase in purifying the consciousness of the mind from all illusion in order that it may be transmitted into the consciousness of the soul. One sees that the material and spiritual worlds of lower and higher illusion play an irrepressible role in the divine game, which has its goal that man shall become consciously aware of his own divinity. The positive values derived from the divine sport in illusion can be harvested without simultaneous collection of the residual byproducts of the coming to consciousness termed impressions or sanskaras. An analogy here. A newly constructed building is not considered to be really completed until the debris of construction has been cleared away. Similarly, the fully developed individual consciousness is not available for union with the divine until these residual products have been cleaned away and there is left only the completely untrammeled unitary nature of the individualized soul, now fully conscious of self. As discussed earlier, in the process of both sleep and death, the individual retains unconsciously and briefly to the beyond state of God. In it, the soul achieves refreshment before it returns first to the subconscious state of ordinary dreams or the intense subconscious state of heaven or hell, and then to the ordinary conscious state of wakefulness or reincarnate life. The individual cannot remain in the beyond state of God for long and for very important reasons. The goal is to achieve the full awareness of consciousness, which is fully achieved when all of residual impressions have been dispelled. Full consciousness is achieved in the first human form, but remains captured, so to speak, by the residual impressions which continue to exist regardless of the waking or sleep state of the individual mind. It is as if they continue to stand as the unpaid balance of the price of consciousness. It is due to the standing impressions or sanskaras that the individual consciousness must return again and again from oblivion to square its account with illusion in illusion. Allow me to read this last line again. It is due to the standing impressions or sanskaras that the individual consciousness must return again and again from oblivion to square its account with illusion in illusion. However, consciousness must disengage itself from investment in the material realm of action. For in the long run, all activities of the worldly man are like the movements of someone on the surface of the ocean. He develops some knowledge of the ocean of life through these activities, but only as much is obtainable through exploration on the surface of the ocean. The time inevitably comes when he wearies of surface wanderings and makes up his mind to plunge into the depths of the ocean of life. Thereupon, he becomes deeply concerned with the riddles of whither and whence, and this fact constitutes his spiritual birth by which he is eventually ushered into the path. The path of divine knowledge has both beginning and end. In rare cases, a pilgrim may be very advanced due to efforts in previous incarnations. In such case, he may attain divine knowledge instantaneously as a gift bestowed upon him through the grace of a master. In most cases, though, the pilgrim has to travel the path by stages, attaining his knowledge gradually. The understanding of God which the average person attains through belief or reasoning is so far removed from the true understanding that it cannot be called inner knowledge. Such true knowledge, gnosis, does not consist in the construction or perception of an ideology. It is a product of ripening experience that attains increasing degrees of clarity. It consists in man's consciousness becoming more real and participating increasingly in the truth until there is nothing more to become and nothing more to assimilate. The devotional rituals followed in religions do not lead the seeker to the true inner journey, for in greater part they are mechanical observances barren of the redeeming experience of divine love. Nevertheless, regardless of how rudimentary these types of belief and devotional observances may be, they do contain in latent form the future inner knowledge. As the aspirant struggles through the obscuring fog of mental and emotional tension, his consciousness becomes more one-pointed, forming a spearhead that eventually pierces through the curtain to the inner path of divine knowledge. Even the early glimpses of this knowledge which the pilgrim gets are a great advance over understanding that rests solely upon faith or reason. I would take a pause here. I think somebody wants to say something, or was it just my Mamaji? Anybody?
How do we define knowledge?
So,
is it just information, more and more information, or how do we actually say understand knowledge at the pinnacle of say realization?
So I think this line has got an answer, but I'll just read it out. The path of divine knowledge has both beginning and end. So I would suppose it is about infinite knowledge. And also he talks about on the path I just read this. Nevertheless, regardless of how rudimentary these types of belief and devotional observances may be, they do contain in latent form the future inner knowledge. So I think it's going within and knowing your own self, our innermost loving self.
Yes.
Anybody else can add in Kama or Nomita ji, anybody? Hello? Kama, are you there?
I don't know whether he is there or not.
Okay. So I think
yes, the point Mamaji said is correct. Knowledge is just not about information. It is much beyond that. It is realization of the truth to the extent that Baba permits it actually. But it is not, it is all, yes, it is beyond just knowing grammatically or just, roting some information. So,
valid point, Sanjay. So it's Mamaji,
yes.
I think.
But what it is, yeah.
Yeah, please. Sorry, continue. Please continue. Sanjay, please continue.
I'm done. Yeah, thank you.
So, Mamaji, I think what Sanjay is construing to is that it's not just information. We also have to put it to practice or assimilate it within ourselves. Is that what you're
Yes,
trying
this question came
basically,
up.
realizing it from the heart, yeah. Realizing it from the heart, it is just, and believing it in a sense that it becomes your nature actually, that you really truly are for this.
Mamaji, you want
Yes,
to say something?
no, this question came up yesterday when Cherry in a different form was asking about this. So when we say knowledge, that is the awareness of what is right and wrong, then why don't we practice it? So I told her, we have so much of information around that we take it for granted, but nothing goes into our, say, mind or heart. And then, if anything really, say, impresses us, we start practicing that. So, knowledge is the stepping stone for, say, actually live the knowledge. And as we go through this living the knowledge, this leads us to realization. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah, Nomita.
I agree with Mamaji. You know, we are practical examples of this. Before entering this group, we had no idea. You know, we were just saying Jai Baba without understanding what he spoke about, what he stood for. Now that first we got knowledge, and then slowly we are trying to incorporate whatever he has lived by, whatever he said into our lives, so that that's how the evolution of a soul, your sanskaras get cleaned up, and you become a better human being and closer to God. Because as we said, Baba is the what innermost best self and stuff like that. So we keep on cleaning up our sanskaras. It's like getting magnetized by Baba's words again and again and again, and then we become one like him. So that's what this whole journey is about. Jai Baba.
Yes, well said. Anybody else? Yeah. Anybody else want to say something? Hello.
No, okay.
So, Mamaji, I just want to add to all what you all have said is that it's different strokes for different folks. It's also mentioned somewhere ahead that everybody's path or journey or stages is different, and so there are as many paths, as many individuals to reach the ultimate goal of union with God.
Yes, yes.
And I think we have to also internalize and practice what information we get, and be cognizant of that we don't sort of go against God's wish. Or is my take on this. So if there are no questions, I'll continue to the last paragraph on this page. As the aspirant advances towards the path, he undergoes a significant change of direction that might be compared to a somersault. He is now more concerned with the inner realities of life than with their outward expression. As the emphasis shifts from the external to the internal aspects of life, the deepening of consciousness, is greatly accelerated. Now, consciousness is no longer committed primarily to external incidents or routines, but is directed towards the deeper and truer aspects of being that demand greater integrity of thought and feeling. Some answers here as well.
Yes.
Caught up with this deeper awareness of the self is a constant deepening of perception into the workings of the world. A refocusing of consciousness occurs, which is far reaching. All the avenues through which the individual conducts his search are radically transformed by the sincerity and concentrated purpose of his effort. The increasing depths of his internal understanding suffuse every aspect of life, giving it new form and meaning and causing him to hasten his exploration with the greatest exhilaration. Poise of the mind, born of the pilgrim's new understanding, automatically and unwittingly brings about a readjustment of material surroundings, and he finds himself at peace with the world. Conservatism, intolerance, pride, and selfishness are shed, and everything takes on a new meaning and purpose. Sinner and saint appear to be waves on the surface of the same ocean, differing only in magnitude, each the natural outcome of forces in the universe rooted in time and causation. The saint is seen to have no pride of position, and the sinner no stigma of eternal degradation. Nobody is utterly lost, and nobody need despair. Someone has a question? I heard some noise. Anyway, the internalizing, which is the real basis of entering upon the path, should not be confused with the purely intellectual discovery that there is an inner life. Nor should the gradual and natural shift from participation in external events to a focusing on inner development be confused with the limited intellectual detachment some persons achieve. Since such detachment is only intellectual, it brings freedom only in the realm of limited intellect and is usually characterized by a sort of dryness of being. The intellectually detached often try to shape the present in the light of knowledge of history, as well as through their insight into the possibilities of the unborn future. At best, such a purely intellectual perspective inevitably remains partial, sketchy, incomplete, and in a sense even erroneous. Further, the intellectually detached are almost never in vital communication with the elements which so largely shape the course of the present. Therefore, their beliefs, even if transformed into effort, rarely produce marked results. The limited intellect is not competent to grasp qualities which are beginningless and endless. Intellectual perspective is workable and even indispensable for planned action. Yet, in the absence of illuminating wisdom of heart and clear intuition of spirit, intellectual perspective gives only relative truths bearing the ineradicable stamp of uncertainty. So called intellectually planned action is really the product of weighty subconscious forces which have not risen to the threshold of consciousness of the planner. Thus, planning often leads to many results entirely unanticipated in the so called planning. In other words, planning turns out to be planning mostly in the name only, containing only sufficient conscious participation by the planners to satisfy their need to feel that they have a real share in the whole game. Intellectual perspective, intellectual planning, and intellectual detachment should therefore be carefully separated from the robust exploration of the inner self and internalizing of the facts of existence that characterize the individual who has set foot on the path. So there's again emphasis on internalizing and great effort. Although the unfurling realization of divine knowledge is often figuratively described as traversing the path, this analogy should not be taken too literally. There is no ready made road in the spiritual realm. Spiritual progress is not a matter of moving along a line already laid down and unalterably defined. Rather, it is a creative process of spiritual evolution of consciousness, and this process is better described as a spiritual journey than as the traversing of the path. Allow me to read this paragraph again. Although the unfurling realization of divine knowledge is often figuratively described as traversing the path, this analogy should not be taken too literally. There is no ready made road in the spiritual realm. Spiritual progress is not a matter of moving along a line already laid down and unalterably defined. Rather, it is a creative process of spiritual involution of consciousness, and this process is better described as a spiritual journey than as traversing of a path. The journey is comparable, in fact, to a flight through the air and not to a journey upon the earth, because it is truly a pathless journey. It is a dynamic movement within the consciousness of the aspirant that creates its own path and leaves no trace behind it. The metaphor of the path is helpful to the aspirant in the early stages of his development because it gives him the sense of new phases of consciousness to be experienced. This anticipation is stimulated further by accounts of others who have completed the spiritual journey. This makes the pilgrim's ascent easier than if it depended solely upon his unguided efforts to visualize the probable path. While trying to understand the path as described by the masters, the aspirant must also make use of his own imaginative faculty, but within the constructive bounds defined in the master's spiritual guidance. Actual spiritual experience, as it is far removed from uncontrolled imaginative expectation, as reality is from chaotic dreams. Though the imagination of the pilgrim is inevitably determined by past experience, it must offer no resistance to the directional suggestions of the master. In fact, increasing surrender to the guidance of the master involves drastic curtailment of deceptive imagination, the roots of which are deeply embedded in the mental and emotional past of the pilgrim. With the gradual transmutation of the aspirant's imaginative faculty into divine consciousness, the veil of ignorance becomes steadily less opaque. In the end, all imagination comes to a standstill and is replaced by the true, everlasting realization of God as the sole reality. Thus, the journey, like everything else in duality, is also an imaginative one, but it leads ultimately to final and enduring knowledge unclouded by any kind of imagination or transitory fantasy. As the aspirant progresses on the spiritual path, a fundamental modification in the structure of his sanskaras begins to occur. Whereas before, the expression of one sanskara in the world of form resulted in the inevitable creation of fresh sanskaras, this self-perpetuating process now begins to draw to a close. I'll just read it again. Whereas before, the expression of one sanskara in the world of form resulted in the inevitable creation of fresh sanskaras, this perpetuating process now begins to draw to a close. As the aspirant's assertive lower self begins to be removed, the tension of existing impressions can be released or expressed without the creation of fresh sanskaras. So there is some suggestion here on how to move. At first slowly, but with gradually increasing speed, the old sanskaras are spent with less and less attendant creation of fresh sanskaras. With the final cessation of the form of fresh sanskaras, all past impressions naturally unwind to the finish, and then, free of all impressions, the soul stands fully self-conscious forever. The various routes by which the individual may start on the journey are many indeed. Several of the principles are referred to as Jnana Marg, or the way of knowledge, Karma Marg, or the way of action, Bhakti Marg, or the way of devotion, Yoga Marg, or the way of mental and physical discipline. Each of these paths may be regarded as a routine, dutifully followed and unthinkingly executed, or it may be transmitted into a path of living discovery by having become the focal point of the aspirant's entire being. Jnana Marg, or the way of knowledge, may consist in the pursuit of speculative philosophy or through independent thinking or in the study of existing systems of philosophic thought, or it may be transformed through concentrating the mind and the entire personality on the truths hitherto mentally grasped. Such deep meditation of spiritual realities is aimed at assimilating their inner meaning and results in lifting them out of the category of intellectual playthings into animating principles which invade and gradually transmute the innermost core of the aspirant. Karma Marga, or the way of action, may normally consist of a life of service to humanity, a life in which effort is expended to improve the well being of people through social, political, or physical projects. In such service, the motivating factor is usually a sense of duty, but often it is corrupted by the desire to achieve power, fame, or other personal gain. Regardless, the way of action creates in its wake many joys and many sorrows, much exaltation and much disillusionment. It often creates further bindings for the soul and is frequently fraught with nagging restlessness due to the worker's expectation of specific results. As often as not, it results in enlargement of the ego rather than its deflation. On the other hand, internalizing the same way of action renders it pure, safe, and spontaneous. In such case, the aspirant may still be engaged in humanitarian work, but that work is no longer entangled in personal ambition. Such service is not a mechanical response to a sense of duty, but a spontaneous expression of voluntary love. Through it, man gradually becomes purer, is freed from many limitations, and finds peace of being as he becomes fully detached from the results of his actions. Under the, under the enlightening influence of inner and understanding, the life of action helps in the elimination of the ego mind and quickens the space to attainment of truth consciousness. So there is a mention of selfless service here. Continuing, the inner spiritual path is irrepressible because of the welling up of divine love which occurs during its course. Even in Bhakti Marg, as the ordinary religious man of the world practices it, this upwelling of love is absent. It is only in the inner transformation of the way of devotion that the aspirant is initiated into the spontaneous love which needs no outer observance for its realization. I read it again. It is only in the inner transformation of the way of devotion that the aspirant is initiated into the spontaneous love which needs no outer observance for its realization. Such love springs up spontaneously in the heart under quickening touch of the Master's grace. Yoga Marg, or the way of mental and physical discipline, is also capable of producing a complete transformation in the aspirant by unfolding the inner path of gnosis or irfan in him. In his attempt to gain control over mind and body, the worldly man often resorts to these yogic practices and austerities to achieve the discipline he covets. The three main systems of yoga: one, Hatha Yoga, which consists of self-mortifying asceticism and physical austerities; Raja Yoga, which is the process of mental self-denial through resistance to all desires; and three, the positive system of pranayam, which consists in the awakening of the kundalini and meditation through an ascending order of exercises. It's further explained in detail. It is characteristic of all the different systems of yoga that they emphasize the purification and preparation of bodies or vehicles of consciousness, rather than concerning themselves directly with the onward movement of the consciousness itself. The contribution of yoga is comparable to that of the physician who removes the ailments which have developed in the functioning of the internal organs of the body. Of the different systems of yoga, Hatha Yoga is the most superficial. The self-imposed austerities represent, in a sense, a pressuring of God or of a God-realized master for either power or realization. It is a kind of bargaining in which penance is undertaken with an ulterior motive. It can hardly be called self sacrifice, for the things apparently denied to oneself are denied in order that one might have something else. Ultimately, it reduces to intelligent selfishness. Spirituality as love can never be achieved through any type of coercion. This is really important to my mind. Spirituality as love can never be achieved through any type of coercion. If spiritual attainment should be sought in this manner, the person invites harm upon himself rather than spiritual benefit, and restriction of power rather than expansion. In brief, he gets exactly the opposite of what he had thought. I take a pause here. If anybody has any comments, observation, or should I continue? So,
Intelligent selfishness.
yeah,
Beautiful.
yes,
That's,
Yes, yes.
that's very well
I
defined,
mark
actually.
that. Intelligent selfishness.
yes, good
Uh,
observation. Yes.
Ken Kama, who has practiced at least 2 or 3 aspects of this in search of his path or way to realization, can comment on this?
Is Kama? I think Kama was traveling or he was busy, but
Okay.
No, I'm
is he?
there. Jai Baba, Jai Baba. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
Kama.
yes.
Hello?
Yep.
Okay,
Yes,
good.
we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm still in Kempty Falls, Missouri, and I hope that you can hear me well. And so, what I want to say is that based on my own personal experience of doing different kinds of yoga. See, I started off with Hatha Yoga when I was young in high school, continued that when I was in college. And then later on, I realized that it was good to be fit, healthy. The gross body was feeling fit. But then internally, I didn't feel that I was making much progress. So then I heard about Vipassana in 94, but then I never had a chance to do it. And then I heard about Kriya Yoga, and that happened in 2010. And then 2012, I was able to do the Vipassana course. And then I did it 3 times. So moral of the story is that Hatha Yoga for the gross body, Kriya Yoga for the subtle body, because it deals with breathing, internal pranayama, which is energy, and then Vipassana for the mental body, because it deals with the 5 physical sensation and the 1 mental sensation of thought. Observe, don't react to pleasant sensations, unpleasant sensations, no sensations. As Baba said, whether you're being praised or being blamed, you are equanimous about the whole situation. So the challenge here is that now we see in the West, they're all going gaga over Hatha Yoga, right? And they're stuck there because it is so external, how to have a good body and all that. And then you use a mishmash spiritual terminologies and all those buzzwords like mindfulness and heartfulness and this and that, which is fine. I mean, everybody wants to feel happy and equanimous. But we all know that each individual is unique. We all have unique sanskaras, different strokes for different folks. So these 3 techniques are not the only techniques. There are many other techniques. I'm just sharing what worked for me. Of course, I had to go through trial and error, and I had to wait for things to happen. People read a lot and get inspired, but that is only 1%. The practice part, perspiration, 99% has to come from our side. And sometimes if you're lucky, you find the right technique. Sometimes you have to try different techniques and see what works. The important part here is not to get attached to anything, because it's just like a tool or technique which allows us to go to a higher degree of consciousness. And what does it mean in Baba's perspective? Baba says, don't worry, be happy. But the only worry you have to worry is not remembering me all the time. So it is remembering Baba. And what is Baba? Is oils, our innermost loving self. Because we know from the Big Bang, it started off with infinite consciousness, eternal avataric infinite consciousness, state 2B. And simultaneously, you had state 2A, substate 2A, infinite unconsciousness, from which the whole evolution, reincarnation, and involution happened. And it reached state 2C, which is the embodied form of God, Saguna Sahakar. So I believe that it's always important to go back to the beginning, the top-down approach. Whenever we discuss something, how does it relate to the home point or the most original whim? Who am I? Because we know that from the Baba literature that Baba himself was the first drop soul who became God realized and became designated as the avatar. And he's the only one who keeps coming every 700 to 1400 years to lead drop souls or mankind towards emancipation. And the paradox is this is all in the divine illusion, the divine dream of God. Because as soon as the Paramatma wakes up and says, who am I? It's a paradox. How can God who knows himself has to say, who am I? So it's kind of an amusement game, the divine game, what Baba calls as divine romance or the divine puzzle or the greatest detective story ever told or a divine sport. So in that respect, how should each one of us use these techniques? My understanding is that one is it allows you to focus, become much more aware. As Nomita was saying, that all this literature helps us in getting right knowledge. But knowledge does not become right knowledge till you put it into practice. So the good part is that we are in the right university, Baba University. The question is, are we able to put it into practice, Baba's messages, for which we have these different kinds of techniques and tools. And once you try these techniques and not get attached to them because they are just the means, and that is one of the challenges that I faced. I used to get attached to Hatha Yoga, I used to get attached to Kriya Yoga, I got attached to Vipassana. And I have told you this story about Punja, Papaji, who got enlightened by Ramana Maharishi. He was related to that great saint. I forget to. He was born in Pakistan, worked in the army, left home, had family and children. He wanted to find God from a very early age. And Punjaji basically then found Ramana Maharishi. And once he was a Krishna Bhakt. He used to have visions of Krishna. And one day he had Rama, Krishna, Lakshman, Sita, Hanuman, you know, manifest in his house. And from that time onwards, he could not meditate, he could not chant. So he went to Ramana Maharishi and told him, I've been doing it for 30, 35 years. I used to play with Krishna. Now I'm not able to meditate. I don't know what happened. So Ramana had asked him this question, how did you come to Tiruvannamalai, And he said, I took a train. And he said, what happened to the train? He said, the train left for its destination. So he said, how did you come to the ashram? And he said, I took the bullock cart. He said, what happened to the bullock cart? And he said, the bullock cart left. And he was wondering, why is Ramana asking such ordinary questions? What does it mean? So Ramana says, you have arrived. He said, yes, I've arrived. So Ramana says, all those things that you did, chanting, meditating, those things left off you by themselves. You don't need them anymore. You didn't force it out of yourself. It just happened. You have arrived. And that is when he was ready to get that sixth plane to seventh plane or whatever. I don't know his status, but definitely he was a very enlightened man. And he writes about it that every cell in his body became triggered with that feeling of blissfulness, which never left him. And I believe he's a very authentic, genuine person. There are a lot of audio, uh, video on YouTube. When I read that, this was in a centenary book of about Ramana Maharshi, where people who had met Ramana had given their stories. But Punja wrote very simple. And if you get a chance, read his biography, which is very simple, quick read on his website. And what I was doing Vipassana at that time when I read that. And immediately that Satori happened, that I was so stuck on Vipassana that, oh, I've understood sanskaras, which Baba talks about in discourses. And this is the right thing to do. I should be doing it for the rest of my life. I will do it once a year. And then I realized that I had become attached to the technique rather than the real goal, which is self realization or to remember Baba. So, moral of the story is now Baba is not allowing me to attend any Vipassana center. His message to me is do Vipassana in your daily life, moment to moment in your waking life. So, summary of this reading is that all yogas are good, but each one has to figure out which one works for you. And Baba has said that if you're with a Sadguru, a living perfect master, whatever his instructions are, that you should follow. But unfortunately, we don't have anybody live with us right now. So we are just following Baba intuitively and he's helping us. So that's about it. Jai Baba. Any questions or comments?
Hi, Baba. That's a great summary. So initially, it was a part of your regular repetition of, say, how you encapsulate all your learning into the one clear stream of thought. Later on, it was enlightening. Thank you.
The only thing I can mention is that Hatha Yoga definitely helps you in keeping fit because we live a very sedentary life. We don't work in the fields, we don't use our body. And this human body is structured for physical work. That is why we are seeing a lot of obesity and all kinds of problems, health issues with people. So, Hatha Yoga or walking every day for an hour or two, exercise helps. And I've noticed that if I don't exercise, my efficiency is 50%. If I exercise, my efficiency is 80 to 100%. So, in a very practical sense, whether you believe in God or whether you believe in Baba or you're an atheist agnostic, everybody has to exercise. That much is very clear, because otherwise you're not fit. So that's another aspect of why these yogas are good, whether you believe in a spiritual life or a material life or both. Jai Baba.
Okay, Baba. Anybody else want to say something? So thank you, Kama. Thank you, Mamaji. Thank you, everybody. We'll continue. So continuing on page 161 in the hard copy, the first paragraph, the yoga of mental self-denial through resistance to all desires, Raja Yoga, is chiefly negative in its method. Somebody has to please. Yeah, thank you. It consists in a concentrated attempt to be freed from all good and bad wants which plague the mind. In following this method of the individual, in following this method, the individual attempts to avoid all wants and desires. This in itself is a form of wanting, for it is wanting a state of wanting nothing. However, this form of yoga, when carried to its extreme limit, can result in the subjective annihilation of the ego structures of desire. The ego structure of desires. The positive system of yoga, consisting in the practice of pranayam, breathing exercises, gives increased control over prana of the body. Some background noise, can I request? Please put it on mute. It also includes the awakening of the Kundalini of the latent spiritual power in man and is supplemented by an ascending order of meditation exercises. But in this yoga, there is the danger of the aspirant having a fall and retrogressing spiritually if he misuses his awakened occult powers. This he inevitably does if these powers are awakened before he is spiritually ready. The aspirant is therefore well advised not to take up this positive system of yoga except under the direct supervision of a master. When aroused under the proper guidance of a master, however, the awakened Kundalini can lead the aspirant to the occult Riddhi Siddhi powers of the fourth plane, which is described later. In any case, the highest attainment possible through pranayam, the breath exercise phase of the positive system of yoga, is that of the objective or self illumination of the fifth plane. Both the fifth and sixth planes of gnosis are states of illumination, but they may be either subjective or objective, depending upon the manner in which the illumination has been achieved. The positive systems of yoga lead to the objective illumination of the fifth plane, but such objective illumination can only be termed self illumination. For in, for in it, God is experienced as without, and therefore, sight of Him is eclipsed or obscure. In contrast, subjective or full illumination is brought about through the inner path of love, which brings about a blending of devotion, knowledge, and action. Such subjective illumination in the fifth and sixth planes has absolutely no element of obscurity because God is experienced within. In a sense, God is nearer the subjective realm than the objective, although ultimately he is inclusive of both as well as beyond both. Such are the traditional paths by which the aspirant may launch upon his quest for realization. The particular route by which the worldly man will start his search is determined by his temperament and environment. But when he enters the inner spiritual path, he seeks the truth of consciousness as it is. This quest for the real compels him to transcend the obscurities of mind and the twistings which arise from temperament and environment. Even as the inner truths unfold, these factors continue to limit his consciousness, but he is now impelled to make a conscious effort to free himself from his entanglements. The first evidence in the aspirant of freedom from limitations imposed by the subjective mind is that he begins to understand without prejudice his own nature and environment. To react intelligently to environment is impossible unless its true meaning is understood. For example, a man habitually inclined to react cynically to all that is good in other people inevitably fails to appreciate the latent good in those whom he contacts. Consequently, he not only misses the pleasure of harmonious relationship with them, but is also prevented from utilizing the potential value of such experience for the good of others. I am tempted to mention about the seven realities where there is we have to forgive those, even those whom we don't like or love.
Yes.
Just a thought which came to my mind, and if anybody has, and I'll continue. Similarly, if a man erects his projects on an incorrect evaluation of the environment, the energy which he invests in them may be wasted in spite of his enthusiasm. Correct judgment of environment and people is an important requisite of fruitful and right action. It requires in the aspirant both the capacity to rise above his personal prejudices and, more important, to understand them. Judgment befogged by personal bias renders right action impossible. To illustrate further, if the individual projects the content of his own subjective desires upon another human being, seeing in that person the fulfillment of his emotional longings, and if he acts under the impulse of that blind driving force, then disappointment is inevitable. He has only seen in the other what is in himself. Would you allow me to read the last paragraph again? I think it's
before that, the last sentence in the previous paragraph is also profound.
yes.
Judgment befogged by personal bias renders right action impossible.
Correct, Mamaji. Yes, correct.
Okay.
So, to illustrate further, if the individual projects the content of his own subjective desires upon another human being, seeing in that person the fulfillment of his emotional longings, and if he acts under the impulse of that blind driving force, then disappointment is inevitable. He has only seen in the other what is in himself. Very practical, very nice, takeaway here. There are no adequate response from the object of one's desire under such emotional compulsion, and therefore no fulfillment. So, true understanding of environment is as necessary for attaining soundness and depth of feeling as it is for engendering efficient creative action. Such true understanding is achieved only when the aspirant frees himself from temperamental compulsion. The personal factors which cause the worldly man to look upon the various approaches towards truth as widely divergent or even mutually antagonistic are gradually transcended on the path. Eventually, the ways converge and their interdependence is revealed to the aspirant. He sees that every way implements the others. Bhakti or devotion becomes the expression of truth through feeling. The way of knowledge becomes assimilation of the same truth through understanding, and the way of action is seen to be the result of the will actuated by the same very truth. In the worldly stage, man is drawn more to one way than to others because of the particular limitations of his character and environment. On the path, they blend with each other as the aspirant gradually succeeds in emancipating himself from the specific restrictions of mind and heart. Even the dry, self imposed asceticism of yoga flower as the individual realizes divine love as he follows the inner path. It is possible by following any of the ways just discussed to lose the individual mind, the lower self, and yet retain complete consciousness. However, this is only true when the zenith is reached through the inner path. The easiest and safest way to lose one's finite ego is by surrendering completely to the perfect master or to the God man avatar, who is consciously one with the truth. In the past, present, and future of the individual, I'm sorry, in then the past, present, and future of the individual are drowned, and during his implicit obedience to the master, he is no longer bound by these actions, good and bad. Such complete surrenderance is in itself complete freedom. Again, reference to the complete surrender. Of all the high roads which take the pilgrim directly to his divine destination, the quickest lies through the God man, Christ, Messiah, Avatar. In the God man, God reveals himself in all his glory with his infinite power, unfathomable knowledge, inexpressible bliss, and eternal existence. The path through the God man is available to all those who approach him in complete surrenderance and unwavering faith. Wow.
Uh,
Yes.
I would ask all of you to think over the sentence. Such complete surrenderance is in itself complete freedom. So normally, obedience and surrender, we take it as a sort of a restrictive activity because we are bound by some orders of the master. But here it is clearly stated that surrenderance is in itself a complete freedom. So we'll have to think of that. To be free, be surrender. be surrenderance to master or avatar?
Uh, Jai Baba.
Yes, yes, Mamaji, continue.
I'm Nomita, not Mamaji. Can I
Yes,
say?
Yes, go
yes,
ahead, Namita.
yes, Namita ji,
You know,
continue. Yes,
it has been my experience. You see, I have been running this Baba Aarti for since 2016, I think, every day. So saying Baba's prayer mechanically, automatically, it's the impressions. At finally, I'm at a stage where I feel surrenderance is the ultimate thing from me to Baba. I mean, I just surrender in everything. When I surrender, I just merge into Baba and emerge as him. My final destination is surrenderance. I'm not asking to remove my sanskaras. I'm not asking to cut down the cycles of my births and I'm saying, let me be a speck of sand under your feet, and I surrender to you. Whatever you have, I take it willfully, I take it gleefully. And as my own experience, that has given me the greatest joy. Um, I mean, while I'm like in thought of Baba, at that time I'm in absolute bliss. In my day to day life, also, when difficult things come, surrenderance is the only thing that gets me out of it. Once we just surrender, say, you take me where you want to take me. So there's nothing to ask, there's nothing to bargain. It's just you just dissolve in him and you emerge in him, and that's a very peaceful state to be. There's nothing to ask for tomorrow. That is the moment you are in absolute bliss in Baba's arms under his feet, and you say, okay, whatever you have planned for me, whatever it's good, bad, or ugly, it is from you to me. I accept it, I surrender to your will. So to me, the word surrender has been the biggest word and biggest to do thing in my journey towards Baba, or in my journey towards self. Jai Baba.
That's great, Namita ji. Probably all our intellectual jugglery is put into real practice by you. That's a good example for all of us. Thank you.
Jai Baba. I don't think I'm doing anything. It's directed, produced, directed, and acted by Baba. We are an assortment of five elements put together, and the thing that binds these five elements um, is Baba. And when he decides that these elements have to be dispersed, then we just break this little shell in which Baba's energy is contained as a drop soul during our lives. And then we emerge, become bigger, larger, uh, wider, everywhere like Baba. And then, based on our impressions, again, he chooses a little picture for us made up of all these five elements again for us to clean us up. And so he decides, but some he decides, some he gives us free will. I think based on free will, that is where our impressions, our karmic sanskaras are removed a bit, and with Baba's knowledge and the words he says and the action he has done, how he's treated everybody, I'll tell you, for me, Parvardigar word was a word Muslims mostly used in Kashmir for for Allah. For me, it was very difficult to say this word, because as a Kashmiri Hindu who's gone through a bit of suffering because of us having to migrate and losing everything, it was my biggest challenge to start my prayer with Parvardigar. Now, having said, when they say that even if you keep on beating on a stone, also, that also gets an impression. So I've been saying this. I again say I don't say it. I think Baba's blessings help me say his prayer every day, and then I love it. I can say Allah with ease. I can say Christ with ease. I remember. I know. I've internalized that there is only one energy. There's only one God, and this has come through Baba's grace of my practicing his prayers. And I feel so nice that he's written it simply for idiots like us, who wouldn't understand Sanskrit or whatever he said earlier to us. For people like us who are English educated, these words come easily to us and we understand. And that Gujarati arti, bujave na jahalat, remove this ignorance, God. And every day we plead to him and say, clean this up. And I think cleaning up this ignorance is the journey. And when we understand that, you become crystal clear. It becomes like a still lake. There is nothing else. I don't care if he brings me here 1 million times. If I'm in a state of mind where I think about him and that gives me peace, it's good enough for me to come and go. Unless there is something bigger, better there, then that is also his desire and his direction towards me. So I just say, Baba, I surrender to you. I surrender my good, bad, ugly, my possessions, which are nothing. I didn't bring anything. I'm not going to take anything. Only your words, your knowledge, your teachings, your clarity can make me something like you, Baba. And so grateful. I had no idea what this. I God speaks used to bite me. I was thinking, what is he talking? And with these 1.5 years, it's become so crystal clear. It looks like you know the whole story, and you just nobody. What are you bargaining here? Nothing. Just to be in that bliss state, to be in absolute submission, absolute surrender. I don't think, at least in my life, there is a better moment than that. Even in our day-to-day relationships, for example, with our children, our mothers and fathers, or our husbands or spouses, when you surrender, you gain. When you resist, there's friction. So the word surrenderance has a huge meaning in my life, and that I've arrived through my blessings from Baba. And of course, with all of you such learned Baba lovers walking the path with us, Baba made it so easy for us. In another 20 lives, maybe I wouldn't, or we wouldn't have reached this stage. We're so ever so grateful. Thank you very much. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba, for an enlightening anecdotes full of, I don't say this is a story, but this was as good as a discourse. Thank you.
Yes, Mamaji, and Nomitaji, full of devotion there. Yes,
No,
practical.
I have to tell you, I wasn't like this. I wasn't like this at all. I don't know what happened to me.
Good, your
My husband will tell you. I'm a very difficult person.
you're transmuted, Jay Baba.
No, I'm just blessed by. I also agree that he has to turn the key. You cannot do it.
Yes.
Something comes from him, and then this whole story uh, starts. It's not in your hands.
Correct.
And I think all of us are blessed in this group. He has handpicked us to wade through this river of life together and say, "Oh, Baba, what a beautiful universe! What a beautiful journey! Thank you, Baba. And your grace."
Anybody else? Nomitaji, anything else?
No, enough.
No, what did I hear about Nomita? She's changed a lot, is it?
Yes, transformed.
Did she still say she's naughty and troubling everybody? All that she said, or no?
No, but Baba was also naughty. He was also funny.
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely. That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
We'll check.
That's inbuilt
The
in me.
boys.
I can't let go of that.
Yeah, the boys will check with Sunil on how you are. That's the difference.
Oh my God, poor guy. I think he. I don't know.
No,
where
he's the poor
I
guy.
think,
I agree with you. On that note, I agree with you. He's the poor
I
guy.
think he was expecting this discourse. He didn't come only today.
See?
No, he was there earlier. Now he has just vanished. Okay.
He has
You
the
are
knack of
muted,
knowing
Sunil.
when.
Yes, Karthik.
No, he has the knack of when to be away, I said. He's good.
family man.
Yes.
We will have to have a separate MST with him. Jai Baba.
Yeah.
Indeed, indeed.
Heart-to-heart conversation
Correct.
with Sunil.
Nomita ji,
We will meet this year on Baba's birthday in Mehrabad.
yes.
So
Jai
then we
Baba.
can have
That's
heart to
great.
heart, and with Baba's grace, I will cook for all of you.
If I
Jai
can,
Baba.
Jai Baba.
Hey, Baba.
I'll be the maid for everybody.
Yes.
I'll be made for each other.
So, good conversations. Nomita ji, आपने मौसम बदल दिया. And uh, shall I move on, or can I?
How are we on time? I am not able to.
We have another 10 minutes to go.
Please go. Please go ahead. Please.
So I'll just repeat the last line of the last paragraph, which brought about this beautiful conversation and revelations. The path
Please.
through God-man, the path to the God-man is available to all those who approach him in complete surrenderance and unwavering faith. Moving on to the
Sorry,
one.
I'll just mute.
Okay. To the one who has unfaltering love for the God-man, the way to abiding truth is clear and safe. Such a one must waste no time playing with things that do not matter. Loyalty to the unchangeable truth, guided by enduring love, is the simple way that leads to God and abiding peace. Although God is more easily accessible to ordinary man through the God men, yet God also reveals himself through his impersonal aspect, which is beyond name, form, and time. Regardless of whether it is to be through his personal or his impersonal aspect, it is necessary that the aspirant seek him and surrender to him in love. When the aspirant contemplates only God without a second, there is no room for love for God or longing for God. The individual has the intellectual conviction that he is God. Yet, in order to experience that state in actuality, the aspirant goes through intense concentration or meditation on the thought, I am not the body, I am not the mind, I am neither this nor that, I am God. Aham Brahmasmi. In exceptional cases, the individual may experience through meditation what he has assumed himself to be. This mode of experiencing God is not only difficult but dry. Progress is more realistic and enjoyable when there is an ample play of love and devotion to God. This postulates temporary and apparent separateness from God and longing to unite with Him. Such provisional and apparent separateness from God is reflected in the Sufi concepts of the states of Hama as Ust, or God is everything, and Hama Dust, or God is for the believer, for the or everything is for the beloved God. In each of these concepts, the individual perceives that his separateness from God is only temporary and apparent, and he seeks to restore his lost unity with God through intense love, which consumes all duality. The only difference between these two is that whereas the individual who follows the concept of Hamadust rests content with the will of God as the beloved, in the concept of Hama as Ust, he longs for nothing but union with God. Since the individualized soul, which is in bondage, can be redeemed only through divine love, even perfect masters who attain complete unity with God and experience Him as the only reality apparently step into the domain of duality and talk of love, worship, and service of God. Divine love, as sung, as sung by Hindu masters like Tukaram, as taught by Christian masters like St. Francis, as preached by Zoroastrian masters like Azar Kaiwan, and as immortalized by Sufi masters like Hafiz, harbors no thought of the self at all. It consumes all frailties which nourish the illusion of duality and ultimately unites the individual with God. The awakening of this divine love in the heart of the aspirant and the cleansing of his being is one of the functions of the God, man, and perfect masters. The life of love of a perfect master is unperturbed by desires or duality. Once the mind of the aspirant gets a glimpse into his life of true values, it protests against the bondage of desires and the cage of the separative ego life. The perfect master acts from the truth which he is one and not from any limited ego consciousness. Hence, hence his help is more effective than all the unaided effort the aspirant himself can make. The perfect master does not give something which is not already within the aspirant in latent form. He unveils the real self of the aspirant and enables him to his own rightful divine heritage. Complete surrender to the God man is not possible for one and all. When this is not possible, the other high roads which can eventually win the grace of God are 1. Loving obedience to and remembrance of the God man to the best of his ability. 2. Love for God and intense longing to see him and be united with him. 3. Being in constant company with the saints and lovers of God and rendering them wholehearted service. Avoiding lust, greed, anger, hatred, and the temptations of power, fame, and fault finding. 5. Leaving everyone and everything in complete external renunciation and in solitude, devoting oneself to fasting, prayer, and meditation. 6. Carrying on all worldly duties with a pure heart and clean mind and with equal acceptance of success or failure while remaining detached in the midst of intense activity. And 7. Selfless service of humanity without thought of gain or reward. So we are about 2-3 minutes to go. I think I'll stop here with this. If anybody has got any summary, observations, comments.
I think I request Sunil to put this as another slide in
Yes.
that chain of slides.
Yes.
These 7 postulates here.
Yes, Mamaji. It's a very, very good suggestion. And I'm stopping here because this chapter is going to take a good part of tomorrow as well. It's a big chapter, but it's a lot of good takeaways in this. Yeah. And so it's a combination of knowledge plus practice. I think KP is what I can think of. I would be happy if others could say something or if they have any questions, comments, observations. We have a minute to go.
It was a nice session wherein we had, say, not just reading, many things got internalized today with some of the discussions also. So it was good session. Thank you. Jai Baba.
Thank you, Mamaji, Nomita.
Yeah. Jai
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Thank you so much,
Jai Baba.
Ashok ji, for stepping in.
This is Baba's work. Here I don't want to have any ego. I'm just doing some.
No, it's just the thanks for coming so quickly onto this so that I was able to. I decided on this travel at 4 o'clock. Otherwise, I was to take a flight, so I took the train instead. So that's why I'm not on. I was not able. So and again tomorrow I would request you to help in the morning, Ashok ji. I will tell you if I am free. Otherwise, I would request you to help the same way like today.
I'm available for this, and
Great.
Thank you for this group for the patient listening, and I hope I've been clear and the Wi-Fi. Om Kampu Devai Namah. The Wi-Fi has worked.
Jai Baba. Okay.
Jai Baba. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Okay. Take care. Bye. Bye.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Jai Baba, everyone.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba, Mamaji.
Thank you, Jai Baba.